So once again, we're talking about disposition effect. Suppose you brought 100 shares of HSBC at $80 per share. You're all supposed to to pretend that you just heard this, not over again. And if the price of HSBC is now $90 per share, you're making a profit. And everyone wants to sell shares at a profit, so you sell some of them. And suppose you sell 60 of the shares, the percentage of gain realized, starting to PGR, equals to 60 over 100 equals to 60%. And notice that this ratio has nothing to do with the money you make. It's just the ratio of shares that you have sold. You can define a similar ratio if you're making a loss. We call it the percentage of loss realized, PLR. An interesting behavior is if you look at the ratio between the percentage gain realized and percentage loss realized. So the following graph is for users data from a large group of small stock investors in the US. The source is Terence O'Dean's very famous paper in the Journal of Finance. Are investors reluctant to realize their losses? Okay, so percentage of stock gain realized divided by percentage of stock loss realized. Okay. So the diagram. Horizontal axis, month of the year. Vertical axis, the ratio. What do you notice? First, you should notice it's downward sloping, right? It's downward sloping, which means at the beginning of the year, relatively more gains are realized compared to the end of the year. Okay, that's one thing you should notice. Second, notice that the ratio is almost always above 1. 1 is here in the middle, which means almost all the time, except the very end of the year, you have more gains realized than losses. Okay. Our question is, why are they doing this systematically? Why is this pattern arising systematically? And is it rational? Is it rational? So, to ask whether this is rational, basically we want to ask, is it profitable for small investors, particularly if we have data in this sample? Is it profitable for them to sell? Is it profitable when they sell at a gain versus if they hold longer? So we're asking, are they selling too early for gains? Similarly, we can ask, are they holding for too long for losses? So, okay, from the same data, Terence O'Dean has another paper. Do investors trade too often in AER? So these series of papers, as you see, are all published in a very close interval. 1998, 1999, all on top journals. These were actually Terence O'Dean's PhD dissertation, I believe, and he managed to publish in all his chapters in top journals. Because one of the reasons is it's very groundbreaking in the data set. Before Terence O'Dean's papers, there weren't any study using such a micro-level data. His data set consists of a big database of small investors from a U.S. brokerage. Now, that's very personal data. It includes stock holdings, trading records, background information, which you don't think would be easy to come by. And it didn't. How did he manage to get it? He managed to get it by playing tennis with the boss of the brokerage. So, you never know what skills would be useful. So practice your golf. So from the same data, he studied what's the average subsequent movement of stock price after these investors buy or sell. The top line is what happened subsequent to a sell, and it's positive, which means had the investors hold the stocks longer, they would have earned even more. The subsequent return of stocks purchased is the lower line, which means had they wait longer, they would be able to get the stock for a cheaper price. Once again, this is all on average, not for a single individual case. So there are reasons to believe that investors are not necessarily making the best timing in buying and selling. So back to this diagram. A general rule of thumb in investment advice is you need to cut your losses. When the stock price declines for a certain amount, sufficiently large amount, there are good chances that it will continue to decline. So a prudent investment strategy is to cut your losses at a preset point. And what this diagram shows you is that small investors typically do not do that. They are much more willing to sell at a small gain than they are willing to cut their losses at any point, which explains why you get almost 2 times the sell in gains over losses. Right. So how to explain that is one issue. The second issue is the downward sloping. This is actually easy to understand if you are familiar with the U.S. tax system. In the U.S. tax system, you report you file taxes for every year, and the year is basically calendar year. Unlike Hong Kong, where you have tax that a physical year goes from like April to March. In U.S., it's more like a calendar year. And in U.S., also unlike Hong Kong, you can use your capital loss in stock market to cover your tax. That is, if you lose money in the stock market, you can use that to reduce your tax, which in Hong Kong you can't. Because why? Because in Hong Kong, you're not taxed for any gains either. So in the U.S., there's capital gain tax, which means you have to pay 15% for your stock market gains. So if you realize, but this is only for realized profits. So if you sell your stocks at a loss, you have a realized loss which you can use to reduce your tax. In Hong Kong, you don't pay any tax on investment, so there's no such issue. For that reason, people tend to realize their loss at the end of the year, so to take advantage of the tax benefit. So that's actually relatively easy to explain, and it's very rational. What's not easy to explain is why people are willing to hold on to losing stocks, which is generally not optimal to do. All right, so the disposition effect refers to this phenomena. Okay, and what explains it is what we need to talk about next. And as you can expect, we're going to use prospect theory to explain it. We'll see in what ways prospect theory can explain it and in what ways it cannot explain it. All right, so we're going to continue next week.